Hello again. I'm Aaron Gauthier, Judge of the 53rd Circuit Court for the counties of Sheboygan and Presque Isle County in northern Michigan. And we're doing another video in our Ask a Judge series. We had a question about why some sentences for multiple crimes by the same person run consecutively or run concurrently. So I thought we could post a video about consecutive sentencing, truth in sentencing, jail credits, indeterminate sentencing, good time, and parole as they relate to felony sentencing in Michigan. In other words, how long will a sentenced defendant really serve behind bars? So let's start with some general differences between prison and jail. First, with jail. Generally, a sentence of less than a year is served in the local county jail. That sentence will be for a specific amount of time called a determinate sentencing. So, for example, it would be like this. It is the sentence of this court that you serve 6 months in the county jail. So how long does that actually add up to? Well, the person usually receives credit against their sentence for any time they have served, say before they posted bond, or if they violated bond and were returned to jail. And also the sheriff can award what's called good time credits under a 1945 law that amounts to 1 day off for every 6 served. What that means is that 1 year in the county jail can be reduced to 10 months. This is so that the sheriff can create an incentive for good behavior. If someone misbehaves in the jail, the sheriff can take away their good time credits. So, in our example, the 6-month sentence really could mean 5 months if the sheriff thinks they behave in the jail. And if they already had 30 days of jail credit before the day of sentencing, they would be released 4 months after sentencing. Well, what about prison? Any sentence of more than a year is generally served in the state prison system run by the Michigan Department of Corrections. These sentences are not for a specific amount of time, but rather the sentence is for a range of time. This is called an indeterminate sentence. Such a sentence establishes a minimum and a maximum. It would be like this example. It is the sentence of this court that you serve it is the sentence of this court that you be committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections for a term of not less than 4 years nor more than 10 years. Something that you really don't want to you don't want to hear that actually said to you in the courtroom, because then you'll be going away for some period of time. But how long does that actually amount to? Once again, the person will receive credit usually for any time they've already served while the case was pending. Now, the prisons used to be able to apply good time like the sheriff's good time law, but they called it disciplinary time. But about 20 years ago, Michigan got rid of that system, and they have a new law called truth in sentencing. And under the truth in sentencing law, a defendant must serve 100% of the minimum term before they're eligible for parole. Then once they've served that minimum, it's up to the parole board whether to release them. Now, the Department of Corrections can choose to keep the prisoner all the way up to their maximum term set by the judge. So you see, with that indeterminate sentencing, a good time credit is not really necessary because there's an incentive to behave already baked into the system. You want to get paroled as soon as you're eligible. And if you don't, the parole board will probably keep you in prison longer. So in our example of the 4 to 10 year sentence, let's say the person had 6 months of jail credit before sentencing. They would be eligible for parole after serving 4 years minus the 6 months credit. So 3.5 years after sentencing, they would be eligible for parole. The parole board wouldn't have to parole them. They could keep them in prison all the way up to the 10 years minus the 6 months credit. But anytime after their parole eligibility date, they could be released from prison. And parole, if they are paroled, it involves a period of supervision, usually 1 to 3 years. And like probation, they have conditions. If they violate the conditions of parole, the parole board can revoke their parole and send them back to prison where they can serve whatever part of the sentence up to the maximum that the prison wants them to serve. So that's the difference between jail and prison. But what happens if you're convicted of more than one crime? Are the sentences for both crimes added together for a longer time behind bars? Let's say that a defendant stole a car. That's a 5-year felony. And when they were caught, they had methamphetamine in their pocket. Now that's a 10-year felony. Do those sentences run at the same time, called concurrent sentencing? So the most is really the 10 years, the highest. Or do the sentences stack on top of each other, called consecutive sentencing? So the maximum is the 5 years plus the 10 for 15. Well, the answer is, as it often is in the law, it depends. Under Michigan law, the general rule is that all sentences run concurrently, so they don't stack up for a longer sentence. Now, some people say, well, that means that the new crimes count for nothing. That's not so. Keep in mind, if you're convicted of multiple crimes, it's very likely that the judge will be less lenient with you so that your sentence will in fact be longer than if you'd committed only one crime. But the actual sentences will not be added together for a longer term of the two crimes. So concurrent sentencing is the rule. The exception is consecutive sentencing, stacking them up. It applies in two ways. First, there are some situations that call for mandatory consecutive sentencing, and these are all set forth by specific statutes. For example, if a defendant commits a felony while possessing a firearm, they are sentenced to a consecutive 2-year flat term that they have to serve before they serve their sentence on the underlying crime. So if our car thief possessed a gun when he stole the car, he would have to serve 2 years in prison for that gun possession before beginning to serve whatever sentence the judge gave for the car theft. The other typical situation for mandatory consecutive sentencing is where a defendant commits a new felony while on parole from prison. The sentence for the new felony is required to run consecutively to whatever time the person has to serve on their remaining underlying sentence when their parole is violated. So you'll hear me sometimes say, and this sentence is consecutive to parole. Now, the second situation where consecutive sentencing would apply is where it's discretionary. So some situations allow for, but don't require consecutive sentencing. This is in the discretion then of the sentencing judge. The main example is if a defendant is on bond for one felony and they commit another felony, the judge may, but doesn't have to, order that the sentences would run consecutive to each other. So let's say our car thief is arrested with no drugs. He posts bond, and then sometime later, he's arrested for possession of methamphetamine. At sentencing, the judge could stack the 5-year and 10-year maximums together for a total maximum of 15 years. So how would that really work? Let's say the sentence for the car theft was 2 to 5 years, and the sentence for possessing meth was 4 to 10 years. The defendant would be eligible for parole after serving 100% of both minimums combined, so 2 plus the 4. So they're eligible for parole at 6 years. But the prison could keep them all the way up to the maximum, 5 plus 10 or 15. So in that case, the 2 to 5 and the 4 to 10 really add up to a 6 to 15 year sentence. So that's kind of a lot of information, but the general idea is fairly straightforward. Local jail for up to a year with a specific time set, but the sheriff can give 1 day off for every 6 days of good behavior. State prison is for anything longer than a year with a minimum sentence that must be served before you're eligible for parole and a maximum sentence where you'd have to be released. And the parole board has discretion of whether to release you anytime between the minimum and the maximum. And most sentences for multiple crimes will run concurrent with each other at the same time. but there are some situations limited by the law that either require or allow for consecutive sentencing. I hope that answers some of your questions about how long a judge's sentence actually translates into real time behind bars for felonies committed in the state of Michigan. Now remember to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications so you know when we're in court or when we post a new Ask the Judge video or an announcement of some kind. If you have any questions, not about a particular case, but if you have questions about the court system in general, how it works, or how the processes work, or any ideas of how it could be better, please place those in the comments to my Ask the Judge video in this series, or if it pertains to sentencing, go ahead and post it in the comments to this video. Thank you, and I'll see you in court.